Sure.
The confusion that exists, the misperceptions.
Yeah, so I think this virus transmits through very close skin-to-skin physical contact, often in the setting of sexual exposure. But there are other mechanisms for its transmission, including if you touch objects that individuals who've had monkeypox touch, or if you have prolonged exposure to respiratory droplets. With that said, signaling to people who are in the gay, bisexual, other men who have sex with men communities, and also transgender people who have sex with men, that it's really important to have awareness that it's circulating in the community is really a critical part of the messaging, while not generating inordinate concern and really focusing on the infection as linked to an identity. So it's just an infection. It's not linked to an identity. It just happens to be in the social network.
Thank you, sir. I do want to dig deeper into the racial disparity because it's growing.
Sure.
It's actually kind of fascinating. I'm not highlighting this for any reasons of sexual orientation. Actually, monkeypox is what it is. The statistics will, show what they show. The way of describing this, I found particularly interesting. People are harping on the men who have sex with other men, and that's not the issue. The comparison between the causes of transmission.
So I think this virus transmits through very close skin-to-skin physical contact, often in the setting of sexual exposure. But there are other mechanisms for its transmission, including if you touch objects that individuals who've had monkeypox touch, or if you have prolonged exposure to respiratory droplets.
It transmits from very close skin-to-skin contact, typically in the context of sexual activity. Fine. And it also can be transmitted through contact with objects. Fine. When one puts both of those causes or potential causes of transmission together in the same sentence, the question that I ask myself logically, in what proportion? Is it like 50-50? Is it 60-40? Is it 70-30? Or is it like 95% to 5% or even more? Is it like 98% skin to skin, potentially through contact of a sexual nature, to 2% touching an object? And if it is, what's the purpose of adding that if it's statistically insignificant or statistically much less proportionate method of transmission? One could hypothesize as to why someone would throw that in as a means of transmission if it might actually represent a fraction of transmission. That's one thing. The second thing that I'm left wondering also is when they talk about it could be transmitted through touching an object.
Who've had monkeypox touch, or if you touch objects that individuals who've had monkeypox touch.
When I was thinking about it as I was jogging, if you touched objects that an individual with monkeypox touched, are we talking again in the sexual setting? At first I was like, oh, okay, they're talking surface to surface transmission, much like they said about COVID in the beginning. We later determined that was not, it was not through surface contact that COVID was being transmitted. What's being described here, is it touching an object that another individual with monkeypox had touched? Are we still in the context of sexual activity? Are we talking about sharing objects? I mean, I'm again, social stigma, which this individual is trying to get away from, a separate issue. We're just talking statistics, and we're talking, I guess, science to some extent, although I don't know what this individual's scientific background is. What is the proportion of transmission from object touching versus skin to skin? And when we're talking about object touching, are we still talking about object touching in the context of sexual activity? Those are questions I have.
Or if you have prolonged exposure to respiratory droplets. With that said,
prolonged exposure to respiratory droplets. Okay.
Who are in the gay.
But the individual is Dimitri Daskalakis. And the one question I have is, I'm not being glib or facetious. Is he a doctor? What's the individual's expertise? That I saw some of those pictures, and I'm not getting into that. President Biden announces team to lead monkeypox. He's a leading public health expert. This is from the White House. President Biden announces team to lead monkeypox response. What year? August 2nd, a month ago. Today, President Biden named FEMA's Robert Fenton as the White House National Monkeypox Response Coordinator, and Dr. Dimitri, sorry, I didn't mean to not respect the individual's expertise. Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis as the White House National Monkeypox Response Deputy Coordinator. Fenton and Daskalakis will lead the administration's strategy and operations to combat the current monkeypox outbreak, including equitably increasing the availability of tests, vaccinations, and treatment. What the heck does that mean? Equitably increasing the availability of tests. Okay. Fenton and Daskalakis have combined over 4 decades of experience. I'd like to know how that 4 decades is proportioned. Daskalakis looks pretty young. So I'm going to guess that Fenton is not so young. If I had to guess here, Robert Fenton, let's just go ahead and see here. Let's just do this one by one, people. We're just going to go through this together. Robert Fenton, governmental officer. He looks, if that's him, FEMA, this individual right here, Robert J. Fenton, Jr. That doesn't look too old anyhow. But you'll be seeing some, you'll be seeing some interesting photos that others have been sharing on this story. These are just questions that I have as an individual who asks the critical questions. When it sounds to me like when we're trying to just say, oh, it's from sexual activity and also from touching objects, except it's potentially disproportionately more from sexual activity, throwing in the qualifier doesn't seem like it might be an equitable way to deal with it or to address it, but it seems like a problematic way of describing it insofar as it doesn't adequately apportion the respective risks of transmission. Do I want to show that picture? I don't want to show the picture. If you go to Twitter, you'll see some interesting pictures about Daskalakis. Doctor doesn't mean doctor of medicine anymore, Fry. Well, I know that. I know that that's true as well. Let me just go here, just make sure everything's in order. I know that as well. But I watched that video, and phrasing is very specific. It's very important. And I hear phrasing there that seems to attempt to minimize. And then they say, we don't, these are the statistics, but we don't want to stigmatize anything. Look, fine. Nobody's stigmatizing anything. People just need to know the cause. They need to know the likelihood. They need to know the statistics so they can make educated adult decisions. Okay, people. Tonight, Sidney Watson. I've spent the day watching podcasts, watching interviews, watching videos. It's going to be interesting. I think Sidney and I are going to have, I said Sidney Watson, right? Not Sidney Poitier, because they're very much different. Sidney Watson, we're going to have a lot more in common than I think anybody could have possibly expected that we're going to have in common. It's going to be a good sidebar. But before we even get there, we have time. I don't see anybody in the back office, in the backstage. Hold on. Okay. I don't see anyone in the backstage, but there's another story that I want to get to just before we do this. GQ people, politicians these days, they're not just a privileged class. They're not just celebrities. Let me rephrase that. They're not just filthy wealthy living in another realm, dissociated from the people they are supposed to be representing. AOC, first of all, I thought GQ was a men's magazine. I like a men's interest magazine. Not that I don't even know where to start on this. I started reading the article. It's the rubbish of the highest order. AOC is on the cover of GQ, airbrushed, modeled. This is. I said it before. Politicians act like they're the new gods. They're acting like the new celebrities, like Oasis. I expect Liam and Noel Gallagher to be on the cover of GQ. They might have been. I don't know. Not politicians. Politicians are not the new celebrities, even though they act like it, they get paid like it, they dress like it, and they conduct themselves as though they're the new celebrities. But AOC, look at this. It's amazing. Oh, just posing. It's magnificent. Look at this. It's beautiful. It's the new era of politics. I just had to I perused through it and I'm looking. It's like, oh, look at beautiful earrings. Okay, good. Oh, nice dress. Beautiful. Look, power shots. The power photos in front of the Capitol building. But there was one that caught my eye. This one. This jacket, people, and the color coordinated boots. I don't think it's an accident that it looks like the Ukraine flag, because I mean that's the world we're living in. Politics infiltrates everything. Are we looking at the same thing? Or are you seeing the same picture that I'm seeing? Yeah, where'd the picture go? Here we go. I just had to, for the sake of it, look at that jacket because the credits are in the bottom of the article. That jacket, if anybody's wondering, cost $3,000. It's a very fancy, I had to look it up, Boyens. That's the one. I can't see it. Whatever. It's the one. You'll have to take my word for it. Internet's acting up. $3,000 jacket. Only the best when fighting social justice. All right, people, we're going to, as is going to be the routine now, we're going to end this stream at some point in the near future, bring it over exclusively to Rumble. I'm going to have to post the links when we get there. And now I see everybody in the chat. Remember to ask Sidney about her time living in DC. I will when we get there. Geez, I forgot to put the link up in the. We're gonna work through all these hiccups. I need to learn a new strategy, a new system. Sidney is the boss. I will be sure to let her know. And I see everyone in the backdrop. So I'm going to start with, let me see here. I'll start with Barnes. Robert, how goes the battle, sir?
Good.
I'm going to go with Sidney now, and then I'm going to rotate. Sidney, how are you doing?
Let me fix my audio. There we go. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. This is going to be perfect.
Awesome. Glad that worked.
Okay, so we are on, people. Sidney, in about 10 minutes, I'm going to just make an announcement that we're going to wind down on YouTube and move it over to Rumble. It will not affect anything that's going on here.
Okay.
But I spent the day watching some videos. Some that I'd rather not have watched, I think, in terms of interviews and stuff, but others which were phenomenal. For those who may not know who you are, before we get into childhood memories and then getting to what you're doing now, which is amazing, 30,000-foot overview, elevator pitch for those who don't know.
I am an Australian-American cultural political commentator who currently is very focused on, I guess, the abuse of children, but I started off in the men's rights world and now have branched into how much I hate the erasure of women, how much I hate children being victimized, and yeah, that's my general way of doing things. Is that good? Was that good? A good elevator pitch?
It's very good. But I think I know it's rude, but I have to ask just to get a perspective for age and wisdom. Mm-hmm. What age bracket do you fit in?
So I'm in my late 20s.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I used to think it was a big secret, and then I don't know how people put it together, how actually old I am. The internet has aged me, though. Everyone else thinks I'm in my 30s, and I go, what are you all doing? Why are you prematurely aging me? Stop this. It's terrible.
How did you get into any of this commentary in the first place?
So the long story short, basically I made one video because I'd always wanted to talk about political commentary, because in Australia most people are pretty politically ambivalent, so finding people who thought similarly to me was really challenging. So I made one video. It happened to go viral on Facebook, and then I kind of just kept doing it from there. And then I ended up being picked up by Sky News Australia. I got to commentate for them, which was a lot of fun. But again, I mean, like when you're with a population of Aussies who are just like, oh yeah, it's sort of challenging to get on your feet, but people were really, really great. And it just took on a life of its own.
How long have you been in this field for? It hasn't been that long, right?
No. So it's been since early 2018 was kind of when I started. And it kind of, the first 2 years were kind of challenging because, like I said, I was still in Australia. And then when I moved, I really felt like things kind of took on a life of their own, and they sort of just grew and expanded. And I was actually thinking about this the other day. In a way, I'm sad that I've moved away from talking about Australian issues because I don't want to abandon the Aussies, but I don't know how much they care about them themselves anymore. So I'm kind of like, ugh. At least Americans are into it, like they're always very reared up and ready to go. So I like that about the United States.
Now, were you born in Australia?
Yeah.
And any siblings, and what did your parents do?
So I am technically one of six, but I have, I have a blended, complicated family. So my mum and dad met in the United States. My mum is from Ohio, and then she married my dad. My dad already had 4 other children, and so like I said, we're kind of blended. There's my brother and me, we're full blood. My parents, well, they started off as pilots. That's how they met. My dad is a business owner back home, and my mum, I guess, she was a stay-at-home mum predominantly, but she also had her own businesses for a period, and then she stepped back to help my dad in his business, and now she is a lady of leisure. I don't know if she'd appreciate me saying that. Sorry, Mom, if you watch this.
Now, where in Ohio was your mom from that the Aussie pilot seduced her?
Oh, she's from Cleveland. So who's to say what Cleveland men are like? But she met him in New Jersey, I believe.
Sidney, I'm an idiot. What's a woman of leisure?
She just does what she wants. She just gets to sort of float around, in the ethers. I don't mean she's a prostitute or anything like that.
No,
if that was what it sounded like.
No, I wasn't sure if it was a term for a housewife, which I'd never heard before.
Yeah, I don't know if she'd like me calling her a housewife, so I'm gonna go with lady of leisure. I'm gonna run with that.
Whereabouts in Australia did you grow up?
So I grew up in Melbourne, which is this like a southern state. That's, I guess, kind of, well, Melbourne's not the state. Victoria is the state. Melbourne is the city. And it was a lot of fun. I grew up sort of in the country or country adjacent on a big property and got to ride horses and see cows doing what they do. It was honestly a really, really nice childhood that I had.
Is there a difference in the Aussie accents depending on where you're from in Australia?
I think it depends who you ask. I often get told that I don't sound very Australian, which I'm a little offended by, but I understand why the American has definitely creeped in. I think it depends on if you're from the country or if you're from a big city like I am. I watched a video actually recently that was explaining that there's a broad Aussie accent, which I don't have any of them, just to be clear, but there's a broad Aussie accent. There's sort of the posh, sophisticated one, and then there's the really rural country accent. And if it's, to be fair with you, some of those people, I don't really know what they're saying because they speak really quickly and eat all their consonants. So
born and raised in Australia, and you left to America only in 2018?
So I left to go to the United States mid-2019.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Born and raised in Australia, so you're up to speed with all of the Australian issues. You left before the madness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got out just in time. But you see, the thing was, I kind of saw the writing on the wall for a lot of political stuff. I never thought that they would go as insane as they did, but I was like, wow, this is not good. And again, like I said, because the population is reasonably politically ambivalent, it's sort of challenging to get people up in arms about things that might happen in the future if it's not happening to them at that exact moment. But I think COVID woke up a lot of Aussies, because even now I talk to my friends who, thought I was a crazy person 3 years ago, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, she had a point. So I definitely think having the government overreach so significantly and so aggressively, particularly where I'm from, Victoria went insane. I think people just turned around and were like, yeah, this is not good. We cannot live like this.
Victoria was under the watch of Dictator Dan, right?
Yes.
Dictator Dan, I forget what his famous clip was about. He's the one who says, I don't give a damn about if you don't want to get vaxxed. If you take a position against the vax, you are anti-vax.
Yeah, basically. And then I don't know if you guys saw, but the Victorian chief health minister, I believe is what the title is, he said recently basically that the jabby jabs weren't doing what they should be doing, and so they kind of misled the population. And it's insane to me that they're admitting this stuff now on video for us to watch and go, yeah.
Now, what was your educational experience in Australia? Public schools, private schools, university, etc.?
I went to primary school like normal Aussies do, and I think most of those are government subsidized. I suppose they're public schools. So I went to a public primary school, and then from there I went to they call them independent schools for high school. And that was, my parents paid for that. And then for university, I went to the University of Melbourne, and I got my undergrad I majored in criminology, which was a lot of fun. And then I did a master in journalism, and I half finished a language degree, but never got, I think I have 2 classes left to finish it. I don't know why I didn't do that. It's a bit stupid. I just dropped out in the end, was like, yeah, no, thank you. I'm good.
Was the university, the wokeness that we're experiencing in the United States? A lot of universities really didn't take off until about a decade ago or so. But what was it like at University of Melbourne?
Well, that's a good question because I mean, it was what, like almost a decade or so since it's actually, no, a little bit less than that since I've been in school. I would say that it was starting to be infected with the liberalism that we see a lot of in the United States, but I don't think Australians would ever be as bad as. Maybe today they might be, but at the time I don't think they were. I think the general thing was that my undergrad degree was in a social science, and so people were a lot more forthcoming with these bizarre opinions that we see so commonplace today. So I probably got a fair helping of it. And then obviously I went to journalism like an idiot and got an even bigger helping of it. But I had friends who were in, the sciences, who were doing biomed and things like this, and they never ran into the same issues that I did. So I would say that, yeah, at the time it wasn't quite as bad, but now I think it's probably comparable to what you're seeing in the United States. You got to remember, Australia is always a little bit behind in terms of the social opinions or the political opinions of the rest of the world. It's never quite as bad as, just because Australians do have that really laid back attitude about a lot of things.
Why do you think they went so nuts on COVID?
Do you want the long answer or the short answer?
Well,
long answer is good.
You know what? Before we get into the long answer, I'm going to wind this down, and because this is where we're going to start getting into stuff.
That's true.
I'm going to wind it down on YouTube, people, and we can all carry it on over to Rumble. The link is there to the pinned comment. I'm just going to go. Now I've gotten the hang of this. I'm going to remove the YouTube link. Everyone on YouTube, Viva Fry on Rumble, and it's there. I'm not deleting. I'm just removing it, and we shall carry on. On the Rumble. Let's get into this. So, Sidney, you left in 2019.
Yeah.
Poo-poo hits the fan in 2020.
Yeah.
You said you sort of saw the writing on the wall, and this is why I think, like, as a Canadian who's seen what happened in Canada happen, people were telling me well before COVID, the writing was on the wall. You got these crazy laws getting passed. You got woke governments, and I didn't know what woke meant at the time. And then COVID came, government went off the deep end, and the people didn't seem to care. No. So it seems like it's analogous in Australia, but tell us how it happened.
I think it's quite comparable to what you've probably seen in Canada. You have a complacency and also a kindness there. I think there's a real kindness in Aussies, Canadians, the over apologizing for everything, for just virtually existing, I guess. And I think that when you have that sort of a populace, and Australia's, again, I come back to the fact that Australia is ambivalent. They're also very neutral. They're very mellow about a lot of things. So when you have a population like that, I think it leaves ample room for government to do things that, people in I guess Western countries that care have a problem with. That's why Americans look at it and they go, what the heck? Whereas Aussies go, well, it's all right, she'll be right, she'll be fine. Even my own dad says, oh, she'll be right, to a lesser extent now. And also he's married to my mum, who is certifiably in some ways a crazy person, because she's seen all of this since day one, and he's slowly cottoning on. But my own dad, who's been affected by this as a business owner, is like, she'll be right. So I think that part of the biggest problem is that, and you can probably relate to this with the Canadian side of things, Australians value security over freedom. And I think that is the primary starting position for all of this, is when you have a population that doesn't really care, that doesn't really know who's in charge, doesn't really know what their rights are, doesn't even think that they have rights or care about the rights that they have. And then you take a fear element. Well, of course, they're just going to say, yep, government, you do what you want. It's all for the good of the colony. That's basically my understanding of what went on.
It's funny. I've known Robert for a bit of time, a long time now. And now I've seen the difference between the States and Canada. It's exactly that. Canadians prefer security over freedom, even if it's actually not any more secure. They prefer the appearance of security over the fear of freedom.
Yes.
Robert, sorry, you had a question.
That explains a good bit. Perchance, did you ever see the film The Falcon and the Snowman?
No.
It's in the United States, but it actually has an Australian subcomponent about CIA interference in Australian politics, which is that your conversation just triggered it. Now, what led to you coming to the United States and the good fortune of escaping Australia before? I mean, I think Lauren Southern got kind of trapped there when everything was happening.
Oh, yeah.
To your good fortune of getting out before the craziness descended.
Yeah. So for me, I'd done a lot of traveling in my early 20s. So I'd seen a bit of the world, and I'd sort of
where
come into
to?
I've been to France. I backpacked around the UK for a little while, then kind of settled in London for a sec. I've tried to do as much stuff as I can. I've been to America a bunch of times before I moved, and so I guess I was sort of in this
Out of curiosity,
viewpoint.
where in America?
So actually, I would say now I've probably been to over half the states. But I have a lot of family. My mum is from a big Catholic family, so
Cleveland, yes. Ohio, yes. That makes
yeah,
sense.
it's like they just
What ethnicity, perchance?
Irish.
Irish. Okay, so
Well,
Irish Catholic.
Irish, German, Polish, I guess is the
Well, that's
American
Cleveland in a
side.
nutshell. Irish, German, Polish. A little bit of
It's-
Ukrainian too, depending where you're at.
Yeah, I don't think we have any Ukrainian on my side, but that's sort of like the makeup is everybody is Irish that's from Michigan, Ohio, like that general region. It's bizarre. I'm like, what did you all do? Just like pop off the boat right here? You just like came inland a bit? I don't know.
Well, they were good talkers. That made them good barkeepers. That made them good politicians.
Yeah.
And from there, power flowed. So you visited So you visited more of the states than most Americans have visited.
Yes, I just went to Arizona recently, so I can tick that off the list. Yeah, I've been to a crap ton. I'm not going to swear on your show, but I have been to a butt ton of the states, which I'm a little impressed by because there's only seven states and territories in Australia, so you can knock them off real quick. But here, it takes a hot second to get around. I still haven't been to Montana. I'm desperate to go to Montana because I think it's
beautiful
quite beautiful.
State, or at least parts of it.
Yeah. Isn't it being taken over a little bit now by the ideology? Is that
that's kind of the backstory of Yellowstone, which is the competition. Even though Kevin Costner was doing his little virtue signaling for Liz Cheney, maybe he had to, knowing how politics works in Wyoming.
Robert, that was actually Kevin Costner in the white shirt.
Yes.
I thought that was a joke. It was just a guy who looked like Kevin.
No, that's really Kevin Costner.
Oh,
now, Yellowstone is about the backstory of politics of what's happening in the beautiful parts of the rural West, starting with Ted Turner back in the 80s. And it's all this sort of gentrification. And then you have Bill Gates trying to buy up farmland. And then I represented the great director of Predator and Die Hard and all of that, who has property up there, who basically there's one guy trying to buy up property using banks to leverage it. And so it's an ongoing political warfare, but still beautiful state.
Yeah, I guess I always think to myself, it's so sad how even the Pacific Northwest has been taken over because it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Texas, I loved living in Texas, don't get me wrong, but it's so flat and it's not the prettiest of states. I'm so envious of all these places that are incredibly beautiful to live in, but have the worst politics. So I love the location.
A place that does a lot of physical beauty, that's politics okay, is where Viva's at now.
Sidney, I'm listening to you talk. I'm like, I was just talking with my wife this morning. We both miss Canada geographically, and I was like, well, there's nothing that can make up for what's going on there in terms of geographic beauty. Mountains, snow, skiing, river. It's beautiful. Florida
is just go to Tennessee then. Tennessee's got mountains, got creeks, got rivers, got small towns.
The crime rate in Tennessee is rather high for my level of comfort.
But what is?
The crime rate is
the crime rate.
Oh no, East Tennessee. That's only Memphis.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't Nashville also have a high crime rate? Isn't Nashville also sort of falling off the wagon a little bit?
It depends on where you are. Nashville's been heavily gentrified. So I have family that lives right outside Nashville in the suburban counties, rural counties that are half rural, half suburban. Parts of Nashville a little bit. The Nashville city has been liberalized. The city itself, the working class population is out, but the rest of the state very populous, very low crime rates through most of the areas. Outside of your urban core, you just don't have much crime in Tennessee.
I think that's true for everywhere there, because I think Dallas is the same. I don't like Dallas personally. I think it's just a weird, gross city. I don't know. And no shade.
It's a big oil town. You have to like big oil towns to like Dallas.
But I just don't know who could. It's just, I don't know. Everybody, it's really, really weird because you have all these yuppie people walking around who look very beautiful and everyone tries really hard. And then you have the antithesis of that. And you think, how do these two worlds coexist? They don't really, I suppose. They kind of just live concurrently. It's really strange. But you get out of Dallas and there's some really cute little towns and areas. Like you've got Frisco, which is beautiful. I think Plano's quite nice. McKinney, I mean, like all of the outskirts are really nice. Dallas, not very nice. So maybe I'm just negative.
Robert feels comfortable.
What led you to Dallas, and do you think you'll stay there?
I don't know. I'm desperate to live in a state that doesn't look like, someone just, I don't know, even vacuumed all the fun stuff out of it. I just want to live in, like, almost like you said, Tennessee or something like that. So I don't know. I love the fact I don't have to pay state income tax. It's pretty good. Big thumbs up to that. But I moved to Dallas basically just because I was sick of living in DC, and I hated DC when I first moved. It's a beautiful city, but it's really negative, and everybody's a sociopath and an alcoholic. I don't know if that's fair.
That was one of the early chat questions. Can you describe what living in the District of Columbia was like?
Okay, so have you ever burned your hands?
Yes.
That was the question. Yeah, okay. So it's like burning your hands, but it never ends. But that's your whole body. So you just live in this like perpetual state of feeling like burned to death, but internally and emotionally. No, DC was horrible. I just don't know how people do it. I think I have too many feelings, and I'm not cut out to be in a place where the first question that people ask you is, so what do you do? Who do you work for? Because they don't care about interacting with you as a human being. They want to know about who you are and how they can use you to get ahead. And I can't hack
That's basically
that.
Hollywood.
Always be networking. But now, okay, so Sidney, I'm not even sure we actually answered the question of you came to the US in 2019. What was the reason? And then we got to get into how you started commentating.
Yeah, so the reason I moved is honestly just because I kind of got to a point in Australia where once again I was like, no one cares. They care enough that they'll pay attention, but not so much that they want to get involved in actually changing the trajectory of the country. And that's no shade to Australians. That's just the general way that they kind of are towards a lot of things. That makes them very enjoyable as people because they're very laid back, but it doesn't really help if you want to structure your life around political commentary and political change. Because I would, I had a protest once for men's rights, and a ton of people came. Like, don't misunderstand. A bunch of people turned up, and they were awesome, and I loved meeting so many of them. But I thought for an issue that's pervasive, that seems to have a lot of support, there isn't too many people who are demonstrating that on the ground on their feet. Again, that's just kind of the way that Aussies are. I live in a liberal area. Fine. So I moved because I was kind of looking at the country, the way that laws are being passed, the kinds of laws that were being passed, and I thought, this is jacked. And I don't like the fact that everything that I do is regulated, basically. And so I kind of took that, what was going on, the way that politicians were acting, the general way that my state was handling things, again, very, very, very leftist state that I come from, and I thought, I don't want to do this, and I want to be able to actually grow and develop with what I'm doing politically, and the best way to do that is in the United States. So I moved to Washington, D.C., and then here we are.
Very cool. And you started with the online commentary.
Yes.
Roughly when, and how did that progress? What did it start with? How did it get to where you are now?
I mean, it started with one video about gun rights and how Australia and the United States are not comparable when it comes to the way that we deal with guns and conversations around guns, and even just like laws in general, or general population understanding of what, firearms are. And like I said, that went viral. And then I thought, this is cool. I can keep doing this. But I can't watch my earlier content because I find it so unbelievably embarrassing, because I'm so rigid in the way that I'm interacting with the camera. I'm like, this is blah, blah, blah. And it's not good. No one should ever watch it. But I saw that there was a lot of interest in what I had to say, and I thought, this is cool. So it kind of, like I said, it just took on a life of its own. I just kept making more content. I'm so fortunate to have been given the opportunity with Sky News Australia, because they put me on panels and I was able to actually interact with other people who were also interested in politics, and that was a really good place to get a lot of experience doing live commentary, and it just kind of moved on from there. I mean, Americans are very welcoming. I think this is something that gets overlooked routinely. Americans are very pro freedom. They're pro people who care about freedom, and so I was embraced really quickly over here. But it's all been online. I mean, my channel, my YouTube channel, although it's gone through some changes with what YouTube's doing, I'm sure that you guys can both relate to this, the way that YouTube goes about things. It's maintained, it's floating, it's just cruising along, doing
Sidney,
its stuff.
will it embarrass you if I bring up the video?
What video?
This one.
Oh no!
Give me 30 seconds.
Look at my makeup. It looks like, oh my god, it's so bad.
About guns and gun control in this result of the really deep.
You're not, Sidney, you're not as bad as you think you are looking at yourself 4 years ago. I know what you're doing right now in your own head, but
anti-gun rhetoric that seems to permeate through the entirety of Australia.
Oh, it looks like I got attacked by like a raccoon.
I'll tell you this though, if I'm an agent, I like to think that I could detect, even when you think you're uncomfortable and awkward, that's more natural than people after 10 years, on the interwebs. I'm gonna go put that in the chat so everybody can go watch it. So that that goes viral. You see, like, oh, people are actually interested in this type of discussion here.
Mm-hmm.
There's more issues like this. I mean, you don't get pigeonholed or you don't get fixated on one issue in particular. How do you dive into other issues?
Oh, you know what it is? I cover the things I care about. So sometimes, I've always said this to people when I get asked to do TV, when they go, hey, will you come on blah, blah, blah show? And I go, yeah, of course. Like, that's great. Opportunity. Awesome. Love it. But then they go, hey, but we want to talk about, Afghanistan's new president. And I always try to tell people ahead of time, and I actually did this for Rob. I DM'd him just now because I'm so bad at time management. I should have done that earlier. I always say, just so that you know, I'm not that political. I'm actually just really interested in social and cultural issues. So the way I think that I get really invested in something is when either I have a direct link to it and I can go, crap, that affects my loved one. And then I look into it further and I go, wow, this is a really big pervasive issue. Or just when something strikes me, it's just really not okay. I think that's how I sort of got involved and shifted a little bit into talking about the erasure of women, which is something that I talk about a lot because I look at this whole topic and I go, it's just so bizarre to me that we're living in a period of time where even the word women is contested. Like how did that happen? And obviously that affects me directly, but it also affects, however many other billions of women that are in the world. It's just insanity to me.
Yeah, I was wondering about your sources, but from watching a lot of your videos over the years, it seems like a lot of your reactions are instinctual. In other words, you're looking at the original material and just reacting and responding to some of the absurdities presented into it, some of the problematic consequences societally that flow from it. But when you do look at sources, how do you decide? It's one of the most popular questions I get. How do I know what sources to trust? What sources should I seek out to filter out information in maybe a space I don't know as much about? How do you go about that?
Well, I think that one of the greatest things that I learned at university actually was how to properly fact find, because if you're going to be writing a paper about I don't know, something to do with policing and you use crappy sources, well, obviously you're not going to get a very good grade, whether you're left wing or right wing. It didn't matter at the time. So I think the university actually taught me how to go through and find quality sources. And I would say now I try to be really holistic in the way that I approach things. So sometimes even if I don't think a source is that good, I will still include it. I'll still include the information, but I give the alternative side of things where I go, yeah, maybe this isn't that great. And here's the other perspective that, basically contradicts this or cancels it out. So then people can decide for themselves. And I used to, and I don't do this now just because YouTube will actually ban or strike or copy claim a video or whatever when you include links and things. So I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be age restricted. I'm sick of having my videos age restricted and deleted. So I used to include all of my links so people could go and find the information themselves, because that's important to me. It's not just believe what I have to say. It's go and look for yourself. Go and determine if you believe it too.
So Second Amendment, set that aside. You then get into men's rights.
Yes.
And I'm thinking Karen Strawn and people in that field. If I could ask the question, why does a woman, and I say this because it's the obvious question, why does a woman get into men's rights when a lot of people are going to say women have issues, focus on women's rights? That's what touches you personally. Well,
I would say because I've gotten that question a lot. I think that the greatest way that I can answer it is there's likely enough women. Well, there was at the time. There was likely enough women at the time fighting for the rights of women. I thought feminists, although I didn't agree with a lot of what they had to say, they were still doing an adequate job going after the primary issues that would, in fact, have affected me. And it didn't mean that I didn't care and that I still don't care about female issues. I do, obviously, because now I talk about them a lot. But at the time, feminists were very good at identifying legitimate things and illegitimate things and going after them. I think the problem was that a lot of what I was seeing was that feminism, particularly in Australia, which is pretty gynocentric, was getting really out of control. And I thought this is just a really unhelpful way of striving, I guess, for women's rights. And if the way that we do that is by pushing down 50% of the population, well, that's not going to work, is it? So I really just got involved because I thought it's hard, I think, for men to talk about men's issues, or at least like the male perspective on a lot of things. It's very challenging for men to do that without being labeled as sexist or misogynistic or, you know, shamed basically out of the room. And I didn't like that. So I thought, if I have to be somebody who can kind of stand up so that other men feel comfy standing up and they can actually have their say and then eventually step forward and continue on, great, I will happily do that. Nowadays, and I'll caveat what I just said by saying that today, feminists are failing because they've been cannibalized by, I guess, liberalism and the trans ideology. And so now they're not adequately fighting for women's rights. They're not adequately fighting for anybody's rights. They're just kind of screaming into the ethers. And so now I feel a lot more comfortable talking about female issues because I feel like I'm actually needed now, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, there's a lack of advocates for men's rights.
Yeah.
Because men often felt uncomfortable
and they get
speaking
shamed.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you know, in the United States, a lot of that arose originally out of family courts and divorce disputes and custodial disputes. And you had a mixture of advocates in that space. You had some who were very sincere, who were correctly pointing out, and some of the best. I think it's The Red Pill. I forget the name of that documentary. Like feminists that set out to make a movie about men's rights and ended up determining that, in fact, men's rights were being violated on a routine and regular basis. And in part, it's because there wasn't effective advocates for them. And it was partially due to a lack of advocacy. And then you had some people in the men's rights space co-opt men's rights language for their own interest, to protect abusers, to protect other people. Like in the legal space, when I dealt with a men's rights lawyer early in the 2000s, 9 times out of 10, they were representing abusers, and eagerly so. So I realized if you were an honest guy who was getting wronged, if your wife was unfortunately Amber Heard, you didn't have adequate representation, because you either went to the nut jobs who tended to represent abusers, or you got nobody who listened to you. So there definitely was a gap of effective advocacy. But now, how shocked have you been at the complete? I'm still shocked at how fast we've had a complete destruction of the idea of biological gender. So much so that, you know, courts are requiring prisons, state prisons, as Viva and I talked about recently in a case where they're requiring state prisons to let men into women's prisons. They're requiring men to be allowed into girls' bathrooms and public schools. They're requiring to recognize them as if they're by their chosen gender identity. Teachers have been fired because they wouldn't use the chosen gender identity of the person. Things that used to be a bad South Park prank. You know, I mean, there's old South Park episodes of this where, you know, a guy enters the women's competition. It's a famous wrestler and he wins, and everybody has to pretend he's actually a woman. And it's supposed to be parody, but now it's our living. Have you been shocked at how fast this has all happened?
Not really, because I think that when something like liberalism meets feminism meets the trans thing, I think that you have this gross sort of mashup that morphs into something that snowballs. And I think we've always seen that, because even if you think about feminism, right? Feminism, what did it want? It wanted equal rights for men and women. And so the way that it did that was it said, okay, well, women can vote, at least. Women can work, women can earn money, women can pay taxes, they can do all these things, they can get divorced, they can, you know, have a say in all of these different avenues of life that maybe beforehand they didn't have access to. And that sort of morphed into what we see with third wave feminism, which is basically just a superiority movement for women that very often concerns itself with sort of irrational, not necessary societal issues that women don't actually care about, rather than, you know, significant things that actually affect women, which is, you know, sort of what we're seeing today. When you see that snowball, it's never enough for these people. And I think that's why we've ended up at this place where we can't even define what a woman is, where, you know, I feel like it's really interesting how men kind of get left out of this equation a little bit, because no one's trying to redefine man. Or no one's trying to come after, you know, the biological nature of men. It's not like you guys get called, you know, like scrotum havers or whatever, whereas we get called cervix, womb people, whatever it is. I find that like a really interesting part of this conversation, that men are kind of just like left alone. But it's so strange to me that we've kind of gotten to a point where even the medical system is participating in this. Like, does that not blow both of your minds as well, to think about that doctors actively participate in all of this, in the denial of the way that we've understood the world?
Now that you say it out loud, they're redefining the vagina as the frontal, but nobody's redefining the penis as like the front finger. Like nobody's. But Sidney, I'll just say one thing: my dog is getting tangled up in the cables of the lights. When you
save him, save the dog.
Winston,
is he all right?
If you see my lights come crashing down, you know something wrong has happened. When you say, women now are screaming into the ether, my observation, and maybe it's just as a male, a white privileged male, I don't see women even screaming into the ether. I see them silenced into submission out of shame, social pressure, and where I know outspoken women who are too shy. They don't want to get into the fight publicly to say, I was fighting for breastfeeding rooms at my work, at my place of business. And now, a biological male is fighting over whether or not we call them breasts or chest feeding. I don't see enough outrage from women, biological women, to reclaim the rights that they had spent 75, 100 years fighting for. And now it's funny. So you went from the crosshairs of the men's rights to the crosshairs of the women's rights. First of all, am I right or am I wrong?
Okay, so I think you're right. I do think you're right. Let me qualify what my point earlier. I think when I say women, I meant feminists are now screaming into the ethers, because I think they've sort of lost the support of even other radical feminists who are just like, what are you doing? I think that a lot of the movement has been cannibalized, like I said, by liberalism, which is what we're seeing today. So now they just scream about nonsense. But you are right. Women are too scared to stand up and say anything. And it's really sad, because when they do try, think about J.K. Rowling, right? I mean, all she said was that biology or biological sex is a reality, because if it wasn't a reality, then gay people wouldn't exist. And think about how much crap she has come into contact with just by saying something that, maybe 5 years ago would have been seen as just kind of basic. Okay, cool. Thanks, J.K. That's great. Awesome. Really good stuff. But she's been doxxed. She's been harassed. There's countless women in the UK that I don't know if either of you have heard of these stories, but there are women who've, dead named, or what's the word when you call someone by the wrong pronouns? Misgendered. They misgender people on the internet, and then the police have shown up at their door. I mean, there's two women, one I believe in 2019 and one at the end of 2021, or maybe at the end of 2020, both of which were arrested for misgendering somebody. Like, I'm sorry, but really, this is the period of time that we're living in. So when they do speak up, they get shamed, they get doxxed, they get harassed, they lose their jobs, they are, have their children taken away from them. Think about the parents that speak up about this and have their kids removed from their homes. So it's sort of like we kind of have our hands tied in a sense, because if you really want to go up against the transgender activist ideological, whatever it is, monolith, I guess that it's become, you kind of are taking your life and a lot of the good things in your life into your own hands and going, okay, I surrender these things because they're probably going to be taken away from me anyway. I'm not saying that you're going to die if you speak out about this, but you will probably get fired. So you're right. It's scary.
Now, and one of my premises about where feminism went awry is that you had a brand or strand of feminism that was equal rights, civil liberties, etc. And then you had another brand that always struck me as which would explain what you're talking about, how it was almost a natural extension where it went, that almost denied gender reality. In other words, it always struck me that there was a brand of feminism, the professional class, careerist brand of feminism, that was all about the problems of the world, or that women don't get to be more like men. Yeah. Rather than, it wasn't rooted in things that were unique to being a woman, things that were unique to femininity. They didn't have respect for sort of tradition and cultural or social in that context. And I always found it weird that the ideal world was to not be a caregiver, to not be part of the home, to not be focused on family, to not be, that somehow all those traditional maternal feminine traits somehow became bad, undesirable, the signs of oppression. And all of a sudden the signs of success was commercial success, market success, monetary reward. And the rest. And so from there, it was almost like a natural extension that when you never recognized biological difference from the first place, you weren't going to recognize, it was easy to adapt and say, oh yeah, men can now be women too. It's all about identity. It's all about a social construct. It's not connected and rooted in it. And I'm still struck by that. Like it seems that there is a lot of pro-life movement, in my view. One, it's overwhelmingly women, but two, that are in the pro-life movement. It's a myth of the pro-choice movement. Some of your biggest pro-choice advocates are David Portnoy.
I knew Barnes was going.
who wants to bang who he can bang, including every whack job and lunatic and nut who reaches out to them. And then he's shocked he gets sued, or involved in controversy. Hey, maybe don't bang crazy, bud. But aside from that, he doesn't want responsibility. He doesn't. I mean, abortion has been a gift for men who don't want accountability, for men who don't want responsibility. So
abortion
how much
on demand. I don't know if you know this, but abortion on demand was started by men, by two men.
Oh, of course, and why not? I mean, it's in their self-interest. So how much does that explain aspects of where feminism went awry, and how abortion, in my view, a true feminist perspective, disproportionately girls are killed more so than boys around the world in abortions. That really a true, honest feminist movement would actually be a pro-life movement.
Oh, so I think what you're saying is correct, that there is a offshoot of feminist ideology that basically doesn't distinguish between men and women. And I think that you have a lot of early feminist writers who basically said that, women are chattel when they're pregnant. Women are, I think there was, I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the very early feminist writers, one of the well-known ones, and her name escapes me. She basically said that pregnancy is kind of akin to torture. And so there was this definite ideology happening, or at least, growing and taking place, even, since probably the 60s, I would say, is really when it started to take root, that motherhood was not a good thing, that there should be no differentiation between men and women, that basically we need to copy paste all of the traits in men into women, and then women will be greater. There was no emphasis on sort of, femininity. There was no emphasis on the traits that make us strong as women that are not shared by men. There's a lot of things about women, I think, that are tremendous that men simply don't have. And that's what makes us, so unique and different, special and interesting. Also, why a man can't just say, I'm a woman now, and think that he's the same as us. He's not. And what's interesting is that you had this sort of concurrent, I guess, movement happening at the same time as those radical feminists who were also saying, yeah, we don't believe in abortion. In fact, there was a vote that went on in Washington, D.C. by, I think, I can't, again, the name escapes me, but I believe they're called the Women's Federation or something like that. And they voted down to include abortion in many of the things that they were striving for at the time with Congress. They didn't want it. It was not, it was not something that they initially were striving for. And then I believe it was based on 2 votes that it eventually got into what they were pushing for later down the line. But it just goes to show that that was not something that a lot of women wanted. They wanted access to birth control because they wanted to control when they could and couldn't get pregnant, but they weren't like, hey, yeah, let's all terminate pregnancies. That sounds great. So I think what you're saying is inherently right. I think, again, the problem comes from the fact that we've sort of shifted our mentality towards babies and motherhood being like a ball and chain. It's something that holds us back, when in reality, I think motherhood is tremendous. I'm sort of in the middle on a lot of these issues, where I'm kind of like, I believe that women should be able to work outside the home. I don't think that a woman's place is necessarily being pregnant in the kitchen. Like, that's not how I would ever want to live my life. And maybe somewhere down the line, I want to have kids, but maybe I will want to be that, but not right now. But I also don't shame women who do feel that way, because at the end of the day, it's kind of like different strokes for different folks, right? Like, some dads might want to be a stay-at-home father, some might want to go out and work. And I think that women should be entitled to those same rights as well. Where I get distressed is this bizarre feminist attitude that motherhood is the worst thing in the world and we should strive to get away from it. How is that feminist? How is the one unique thing that we can do that is tremendous? How is saying that is terrible a feminist thing? It doesn't make sense.
It's just like looking at something and wanting to see what you want to see in it. I think it was Andrea Dworkin who said that sex is an act of male dominance. And then you get other feminists who say sex is the absolute act of liberation. Yeah. It's just, you start from conclusions and then you interpret things accordingly. Where pregnancy, if you want to look at it as dominance, you say pregnancy is torture. And other people are going to say pregnancy is the greatest gift that a woman can ever be bestowed. A man will never know it. Yep. Even with my wife is, speaking of which, my wife, she comes in the room. Okay. She took my phone. Sorry. So it's just a question of starting point and how you want to interpret the phenomenon. But now, look, you're going to get flack for this. Like, in your personal life, in your professional life, we're sort of more independent, so you don't have to worry about getting fired, getting, reprimanded. But what sort of flack have you taken in your personal life for the public stance that you've taken on these thorny issues?
I mean, I think I cleared out a lot of the crazy people who didn't want to be friends with me back in the day. Like, it's so funny because sometimes people, they comment and they'll say like, oh, I ran into someone actually, weirdly enough, who knew who you were and that went to school with you, and they said that you're a racist. I get this like this type of thing a lot. It just makes me laugh. Honestly, all of the people that I know and that I associate with are, even I have a couple very, very, very good liberal friends, and they're very dear, and I think they round out my opinions and make me a better person. All of these people just kind of accept it as it is. I went through the sort of shrugging off, like shouldering all the people off who hated my ideas, and I got rid of them. What's kind of funny though, actually, is when I make new friends now, I always feel really awkward because I don't know how to integrate into the conversation that I'm an internet weirdo who shouts at a camera for a living. Like, how does one say that? Hello, I am a strange human on the internet. Like, I don't even know how to do that. So I'm really lucky that the circle that I have maintained, I hope won't go anywhere. I really haven't been too affected these days, honestly.
What does vampire lord mean?
Oh,
I saw it too, Robert.
I have an old YouTube channel from when I used to write and play music and things, and I would put up covers and whatnot. And a couple of my followers found it, and they were like, oh, she doesn't age. And so then they started calling me a vampire because they say I don't age. And then I don't know where the Lord thing came from, actually. I don't remember how that kind of got clunked onto this. I'm sure it came from someone saying something weird to me. But the vampire thing is me not aging. The Lord is because clearly I'm a Lord, and now I'm Vampire Lord Sidney.
I'm once bitten, twice shy about asking questions that came in super chats that might be actually embarrassing, but I'll get through the super. Let me actually just bring up the super chats. I can't bring them up. I'll just say them. Remember to ask Sidney about her time living in DC from Carol W., who's a member. Done. Sidney is a boss from John Yarber. Done. Just heard over the radio, the last plane out of Sydney's almost gone. I don't get that joke.
It's from a song.
Rob A says, is Sidney a fan of the Aussie Cossack? And I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble.
I'm not very familiar with his work. I think he got arrested recently. I know my mom listens to him. He's another YouTuber.
All right. And someone says, how long will you are here be on hiatus for, Sidney?
I can't. I can't really talk about it.
Okay. That was from Mr. Wolfgram. It must be very exciting to have parents who were pirates. Oh, wait. Did you say pilots? Never mind. And we caught the last portion of the stream. You two close to time for my sanity space. Appreciate both of you and the info you provide. Now, Sidney.
Oh, yeah, and we had a locals chat. I don't know where this came from, but what do you think about Queen Elizabeth?
I don't know. She signs all of our
Is that weird? Like the Queen is still involved? Like, I get it UK, but to be in Australia or Canada and somehow the Queen's still, sure, there's crazy conspiracy theories. I still get people that think, they'll ask me, how do you feel about being part of the British Accreditation Registry? The bar. I'm like, no, those are not the same things. I'm glad you read that, but they're not related. My namesake was martyred in England by the dear king. Years ago, he preached a sermon against him and got to visit the tower, and that didn't turn out well in the end. But yeah, any thoughts on? But so no major thoughts on the how do people in Australia think? Like when I was in Australia, the only thing they would talk about is rugby. Everybody would talk about rugby, but how do they feel at the royal family?
It's quite funny because fun fact, back in I believe it was the 90s, the late 90s, Australia got it. I can't speak English. I'm sorry, lads. Was able to vote as to whether or not we should become a republic, and it got voted down. So I don't know. I guess that was 30 years ago now, but it still gives you a pretty good indication that Aussies are just like, nah, it's fine. We're good with the status quo. I think it's crazy that the Queen is our head of state, because you know what? And not a lot of people know this, but I'm sure one or maybe both of you do. Back in the 60s, the Queen, or at least like the Queen's sort of representative in Australia, fired the government, just like point blank fired Gough Whitlab's government because they were just terrible and just not good, and brought in a bunch of crazy social programs. But people don't realize that the Queen has the ability to fire our government. She technically signs off on all our legislation. She makes it law. Once she signs it or gives her royal assent, it's now law. People don't realize any of this. I don't have an opinion on it because, to be honest with you, I don't really know that much about the implications of having the Queen as our head of state, besides the fact that I just think it's hilarious. I do kind of wish that Australia was a republic, because maybe then we would participate less in sort of the general Commonwealth behavior. But, honestly, I don't really have an opinion. It's kind of cool that the Queen has lived this long. Good job, her. I guess the lizard people do have special genes. I don't know.
And apparently she had a drink every day, and she was told to stop drinking gin, I think. And she said, you know what? I told when my mother told me this story, because my parents are one's in their 80s, the other one's close. And like, oh, we should do things to live longer. It's like, dude, how much longer do you need to live? Be happy and don't just go on for however long. But Sidney, so I was watching some of your stuff today. I was going back in the day and trying to bone up. You had an experience on Vosh, on a live stream on Vosh, where you discussed, I don't know if you used the word toxic because that's sort of a cliche term, but I forget how you described the chat in Vosh. And I was watching that and saying, you know, like people who do live streams on other people's channels, especially in different environments, who actually pay attention to the chat can be shocked. They can get traumatized. First things first, how did you end up on Vosh? What was the nature of the discussion? And why were you reading the chat while you were live?
Oh, so actually Vosh, I think maybe what you're referring to is Vosh reacted to a video that I've never been on his channel, and I don't think I would probably go on if he ever invited me, but I don't think he ever would because we have he reacted to a video that I participated in on a channel called Jubilee, where I discussed basically being sexually assaulted, and then he said I made it up, which I didn't really appreciate. I was like, that's kind of an uncool thing to say. So my reaction, I think, are you talking about a podcast that I was on where I was talking?
Yes,
about this?
and I might have gotten confused. Yeah,
so that was that situation. I think maybe what you're referring to is the show that I used to host. The chat was very anti-female, and I just never really appreciated it. And I do think that there's quite an under talked about part of the internet, especially perhaps on the right wing, mostly on the right wing, that does dislike women quite a lot. And I think that experience was really eye-opening for me because, to be honest with you, my audience is so mellow and they're very warm and welcoming and they're very clever people. And I would say a lot of them are moderate. They're kind of from all over the political spectrum. And so I was never exposed to people who just hate you by virtue of the fact that you have the wrong chromosome. So that was a really interesting thing for me. And I think for people to go through that and experience how vile the internet can be, it's definitely like a leveling up opportunity for you as an emotional human being. Like you get to a point where you're like, oh crap, this is the nature of this, huh? And then you kind of have to go the thickest skin. And that's kind of what I went through with that.
Okay, good. No, so I first of all, I like how polite you are in saying that I've grossly misunderstood something. I know because I
don't know if I answered the question.
You did. It's the idea of it was a podcast. I think you were on her podcast. I don't remember her name now, but you were
Blair.
talking about. I'm sorry, and I thought you had been on Vosh in terms of watching the chat, and it's an interesting thing. I think like when the chat, I think, is not always toxic, but there are always toxic elements of it. But yeah. I do tend to view it just like it's the place where people come to make the jokes that they can't make in real life. And so I don't think it's bona fide misogyny, bona fide anti-Semitism, bona fide racism. I just think it's people who think they're making the jokes and it's the time to do it anonymously on the interwebs. But my goodness, it won't erode the soul. It will thicken the skin.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it, because it's pretty brutal. I think that, again, like I've been really blessed that the only people who've ever really come at me have been feminists and leftists and the trans rights activists. But I've never really had some of the experiences before that I've had in the last little while, and it's kind of been a really eye-opening thing for me. So I think I'll qualify and disagree with you in the sense that just slightly that for me it can be a little soul destroying because it's like, oh. But I, like you said, you grow a thicker skin because you just got to get over it. If you want to be in this space, and I've said this publicly when people whine and cry and whatever, it's like, well, you do have to level up. That's the only way that it can go.
Yeah, and you have people out there that are true sickos, perverts, people who judge people based on gender and race. Those people exist, and they love to go to YouTube chat in particular.
Yeah.
In my experience, and just a repulsive group of people. And unfortunately, some of them rise to places of influence within the political right. Yes. I'm not going to mention certain people necessarily by name. I might, depending on my mood. But what was you saw recently Lauren Southern's documentary. I knew some of the backstory of that beforehand. Disappointed in one person in the UK in particular, but people go crazy sometimes. It's the nature of it. But there's some others that, you know, she properly dealt with her experience. And it's same in law, some other professions. It's like what I always say is there's a balance between all the craziness that's happening with woke ideology on race and gender, and recognizing the reality that people are constantly harassed, discriminated against, you know, subject to unique kind of threats based on race and gender. That reality still exists, and I try to push back on those people who try to pretend that because one group is wrong, that means every allegation or accusation that's ever connected to that group is wrong. Yeah. Two things are very different realities. What do you think about Lauren Southern? You know, her courage in making that, and how much do you think that is an obstacle young women face in the social influencer space?
Oh my God, Robert! This is okay. I have a lot of opinions about this, but I've tried not to go into detail just because I think that there's an element where we don't want to be told things that are necessarily true because it goes against what we've been taught to believe. So I think that there's this real tribalism on both sides of the coin, don't get me wrong, where we kind of want to protect our own. And so when someone goes, this person's a dirtbag, we go, no, they couldn't possibly be. They think similarly to me. They also believe taxation is theft. And so we have this sort of inclination towards protecting them. When in reality, I mean, I think it's okay to weed out and get rid of people who are buttheads just because they exist in the same space. Like I would have no problem, you know, calling people out. And I don't know what you lads think of Andrew Tate and this whole thing that's come up, but it's been really interesting to see the response where a lot of people have defended him just because he's been banned on the internet. And they're like, well, this is somebody who, yeah, he might have some questionable opinions. He might have some really corrosive opinions, but he shouldn't be shut down completely. And do I agree with that on a free speech level? Sure. Do I think that, you know, Andrew Tate is the person that everybody should be emulating right now? Absolutely freaking not. Do I think that we should be calling it out? Absolutely. But no one will do it because it's like they don't want to throw shade at their own side because they think that that's problematic. So I think it can be really challenging to be a female in our space, especially because you are sort of in a lot of ways contending with some traditional viewpoints that maybe don't lend themselves towards women being on the same footing as men. I don't know how to articulate this in a way that doesn't sound...
It's a toxic mindset of people that think they're being cool by rebelling, by embracing certain, you know, whether you call it chauvinistic. I just, you know, they're men trying
it is kind of chauvinistic, yeah.
I think they're men trying to pretend to be men who aren't men. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to be uber masculine to substitute for their lack of honest, authentic masculinity.
Yes.
Someone who's an actual man doesn't have to keep telling you they're a man, just as a clue.
Yes.
But you know, so and and I understand its roots. It's a reaction, particularly with younger men that have gone through the men are bad, that men are toxic, you shouldn't be male, masculinity is bad. But this is a dangerous reaction. You know, the reaction isn't to embrace the toxic stereotype that you've been falsely accused of originally. And we're seeing it across the board. I mean, people like a certain Nick Fuentes and some others, I mean, they have whole communities that are like this. They're just toxic people. They'll occasionally raid our YouTube chat anytime we've had a woman guest on, for example.
I don't know. Yeah,
they track really me annoying all the time just to because they're still mad about the
Islamofascist. Robert is still the word they're angry at.
Islamofascism, baby, it's still a word. If you're using it, I won the debate. So just FYI. But it's just the nature of the animal. But yeah, I thought it was good for Lauren to talk out about it.
Yeah, she didn't cover like nearly enough of it though, Rob. Like she and I were chatting a little bit behind the scenes because we have some crossover experiences, and I was really happy for her. And it's funny because when I was on the Blair White's podcast, I kind of touched on some of the things that I'd been observing, and I told her afterwards, I said, hey, this is just what I said, you know, because we know some of the same people who've done some of the same things, and it's very disconcerting. Her experiences have been, I think, kind of representative of what a lot of females, well, not a lot, but a portion of females have experienced. And the thing is that because we don't want to be lumped in with the crazy leftist feministy types who are like, wow, this man looked at me the wrong way, victimization. It's so hard for us because we're like, okay, this isn't right. but we don't want to say anything in case it sort of gets lumped in like that. And so you're kind of caught in this weird position where you're like, this has to be called out because it's not okay. It's not okay. I don't want to see any other woman or man victimized in any capacity. But you kind of run into this issue where you go, how do I broach this in a way that people will listen to? Because the worst thing that can possibly happen is you say what needs to be said and people go, I don't believe you. Or they go, no, it didn't. No, wrong. And they reject it because it goes against the tribalism. Does that make sense? Sorry to interrupt you as well.
Oh,
Rob.
yeah. Well, and you have people that some of it's for their own self-interest, for some of it's their political self-promotion. People like Milo was bad for business from day one. I met him with Steve Bannon, told Bannon that at the time, Republican National Convention. This guy screamed problem. Yeah. He didn't listen because that's Steve. He gets himself into lots of trouble. He's like our dear ex-president sometimes. But that there's this toxic element that has caused constant, unnecessary, in my views, issues because they've embraced ideas and we're supposed to not be critical or call them out on it.
Yep.
When we should. I mean, some of us called out people like Bill Barr at the time, and people didn't listen. And now they get to see the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
But in your experience in the conservative media space writ large, what has been disappointing? What has been empowering? What has been something you see as future opportunity? What do you see as some of the restrictions for those people out against the woke and the cultural commentary space?
I would say the greatest thing that I've experienced in this space is genuinely the kindness and the intelligence of, say, the audience that I would attract. I actually have so much respect for my community because I think they are really brilliant people and it's made me a better human being. There are a lot of really good faith people who are in this space as well. I was going to say, just to what you were talking about before, Rob, if I can slide this in there. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with a man named Boyens. He's a Blaze contributor, and he works a lot with child trafficking, human trafficking, and sort of helps women basically find better places and gets kids out of yucky situations and things. And he's super Christian, and he's just a good man. And he is the sort of man, when people talk about masculinity and they talk about what you want to emulate, and I say this is someone who's not remotely religious, so that's not even factoring into what I'm talking about right now. But when people talk about these real alpha genuine men, he is who I think of, because he is somebody who is worth emulating. He's a good, yeah, there you go. He's a good man. And so it's interesting, and I just want to add this in here to just, because I do think what you're saying, Rob, is 100% correct. People who need to tell you that they're masculine and all these bits and pieces, they are not. And they're the people that I've run into in this space a little bit who have freaked me out, because I think I don't want anybody taking cues from you about masculinity in general, because it's faux masculinity. It's not real. It's actually just kind of women hating under the surface of it all, or just hating anybody who isn't exactly what they want you to be. And I don't like that. I don't want to live in a world like that. So I just, shout out to Yako for being one of the most genuine people ever. He is worth emulating. These other weirdos who are like, I'm an alpha. Probably not. So that's been a really negative thing to come into contact with. And it's kind of shattered a lot of my illusions, is realizing that the people who I've either looked up to or who I've thought are just terrific, finding out that maybe they're not, that's been really hard. But then on the other side of it is realizing that there are so many good people. That's been sort of the white pill. As for people on the ground doing the whole, trying to fight and push back against this, I always think to myself that you really have to have sort of a lot of gall to do that, and I respect them a lot. And people always say to me, like, what advice do you have? And I just go, I don't know, just do something. But that's also another white pill, is watching people go, I've had enough, I'm going to do something. And I go, hell yeah, do it. Do all of the things. So
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, my advice, my daughter, was 2 men to stay away from: anyone who keeps telling you he's a man, and anybody who's a male feminist. Those are the two.
They're two sides of the same coin.
They're going to be stalkers, harassers, abusers, assaulters, almost without fail.
I think Gadsad referred to the male feminists as the sneaky fuckers in his book, The Parasitic Mind.
They are. They're always stalkers. They're always crazy. They're little Norman Bateses in waiting. That's who they are. And the guys who always say alpha, I said, like, unironically using the term alpha male is very flag raising for me. But on the Andrew Tate discussion, it's an interesting thing that it highlights the tribalism on both sides. Yeah. If I come out and say, I've been relatively familiar with Andrew Tate for a while, not like thoroughly, but my daughter's 13. Mm-hmm. Boys watch Andrew Tate. They send her the clips. I was like, okay, let's watch this. And I say, okay, this is what's wrong with what I'm listening to now. That's the separate discussion from whether or not he should be deplatformed under the pretext of promoting violence or being dangerous to women.
I say let's have the discussion, because I think I'd like to have Andrew Tate on and address the substance of what he's saying in terms of women can't have conversations without being disloyal, but men can go have sex as much as they want because that's nature.
Yep.
But then you get into the discussion of, I disagree with what Andrew Tate might have to say, but I still defend his right to say it. And then everyone's like, oh, so you must be a male chauvinist pig too. And it's like, no. Versus, I don't know. I'm trying to think of another example of people who say tremendously stupid things where I say, look, I don't necessarily have to deal with them, but they should have the right to say it. And the only cure to bad free speech is more free speech.
I agree.
By the way, Robert, just so you know, someone, white guy said, Fuentes has completely imploded Barnes. He doesn't have much prominence left. I don't know. Not people.
Well, those kind of guys always do. It's the history of the Klan. You go back to these other groups. These grifters, they can't help themselves. Their personal behavior will catch up to them. It almost always does. Not unless they're in actual positions of political power, and that's where the sociopaths get rewarded. So that's a different animal altogether. Speaking of how culture distorts gender perceptions, you had a recent video about how Hollywood's version of feminism is very anti-women at core. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just summarized it. It's that the way that women are portrayed in media is not, well, it's not representative of human beings. I mean, they basically give us these perfect people who have no flaws, they have no internal struggles, which is just generally like bad writing. Because I was actually thinking about this. I watched one of these new little mini series on Netflix the other day about some girl who's in a satanic cult, and it started off really strong and then it just fell off, and I was like, God, this sucks, because the writing is bad. And so when you're writing characters, it's so important to focus on actual human characteristics and traits, which often get left behind when they're writing these female roles. And so when we look at like She-Hulk, I mean, there's a bunch of them, but She-Hulk's like the newest one that everyone's fixated on. She's just great at everything. She's just this woman who's out there to be really good at her career and date a bunch of guys. And I think to myself, like, who does this appeal to? Because it's not appealing to me. I find her annoying. It's not appealing to men. You guys probably find her annoying. Who is this for? And this is basically what Hollywood is doing, is it's taking this horrible, horrible male archetype, this like villain male archetype, and copy pasting all of those traits into women and going, here you go, enjoy. Like, who is this for?
My theory now, I watched that video today. We've had Razor Fist on. We've had Doomcock. We've had Doomcock on. We've had
Nerdrotic
and
gamers.
I now have come to the realization.
The quartering. We had
the quartering on. They're not trying to get anybody to appeal to anything. They're trying to indoctrinate. And when people rebel, they then say you're a misogynist for laughing at the idea that I saw that clip, dude. I'm not watching that show, whatever it is. I saw the clip of She-Hulk saying she controls her rage infinitely better than what's his name? Banner,
Bruce Banner.
Than him, whose parents were murdered in front of whatever. She controls it much better because someone catcalls her on the street and tells her how to do her job.
While shouting at him, she's shouting at him, controlling her anger so much.
And he's nodding like, okay, sweet. Like his nod was the most patronizing mansplaining nod ever. But no, they're not trying to make you like anything. They're trying to indoctrinate you. And when you lash out and reject it, they then call you whatever ist and phobe they want. And they've done it through and through. And now I've seen it through and through.
Yeah.
I say, what's the? But you brought up good points in that video. Like back in the day, Sigourney Weaver. Sandra Connor, her name was in real life.
Actually, I don't know.
Oh, I remember. I had the biggest crush of my life on her from T2, not from T1.
Oh, the Terminator. Oh yeah. Back when you had badass women. You could have. Gina Davis played one in The Long Kiss Goodnight. There's a range of women characters that are realistic, that are holistic, that can play many different roles. Now, but part of it is trying to break down role. Like this like certain characters, because of athletic and physical performance, are just naturally in the comic space and other space, they're just naturally male characters. Now you take She-Hulk, at times it was a popular comic. They just gutted it and just rewrote it for this sort of woke feminist wine mama kind of, it's an audience that's like, who's your audience? That's the other thing with all this. It's like my feminist relatives and friends, they're not going to watch it, right? They'll be, oh, that's great. That's great. They're not going to watch it.
Well, it's not for them.
Yeah, exactly. It's extraordinary. How much do you get into the cultural, like in terms of films, books, things like that? How much is that part of your focal point?
Well, I would actually like it to be a greater part of my focal point because I'm really big into video games. I'm like a secret gamer, and I've always wanted to talk about these things because I think that not just television and film, but just video games are also another vessel by which these messages are propagated. And so it's kind of frustrating to me that even, recently I played, again, sorry if you guys don't know these games, but I'll promise I'll condense what I'm about to say so it's not too time consuming.
We have some geeks and gamers in the audience.
Okay, good. When I played Horizon recently, the new one, there was even like just these unnecessary parts where where characters are randomly gay or randomly trans, and it's like, why? Like, why? Like, they're living in a post-apocalyptic world where they're having to fashion, weapons out of like animal, well, not animal, but machine carcasses, and now we're focusing on people being trans and not being able to wear female armor. Like, what am I listening to right now? And so it's stuff like this that I see in video games, even The Last of Us 2, which is so sad because that was a game that's predicated on the relationship between a man and his surrogate daughter, or like I guess now adopted daughter. And they just destroy it in the second one by focusing so heavily on making the kid gay and having this random, again, like non-binary person. And then the main character dies too early on. And it's just like, what is happening? Like, who is this for? It drives me crazy because I play these games and I sit there screaming at them going, what? Like a crazy person, because I am so blown away by how you can take these tremendously awesome games and then destroy them either with a sequel that doesn't make any sense, doesn't actually, it's not for the actual gamers themselves, or you can take characters who are based on, mythology or history or something, race or gender swap them and then go, here you go, enjoy. And we go, but this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense.
Robert, chat in Rumble is saying you could light up the cigar if you were so inclined. Now, Sidney, you mentioned gaming, and my initial reaction was, I don't game. I have nothing.
But I thought didn't you finish a game and like?
Oh yeah, Nintendo NES. But I don't have a TV here that has the old cable, so I haven't even been able to hook up our Nintendo. But Sidney, I listen to say, I'm not into that vice. But then my kids watch TikTok, which is another one of the videos that I watched today, which I found slightly disturbing, but very disturbing. And now I'm like contemplating whether or not outright banning TikTok.
Yes,
and how do we face it?
Cut them off. So
Sidney,
you can play me. It was by instruction of your legal counsel.
Robert, I might have to find someone to blame other than me. But so like, I'm not going to compare vices, but what you raised by way of issues with TikTok is fascinating. And I think anybody who has not seen that video of yours, give us a 5-minute or whatever, 2-minute, give us the TLDR rundown of TikTok, why it's toxic, and just to substantiate like the sources and how you came to that conclusion.
Well, there's two that I've made about TikTok, and basically it's that they're kind of in the same realm where they're basically both about how TikTok is a mental illness factory, and it's very good at either getting your children addicted to it, because people forget that the primary age of kids using TikTok are like, I believe it's 13 to 17. That's the primary age. And so these are the most impressionable people out there, right? And so what you basically have, there's a couple reasons why TikTok is actually really, really terrible for your kids, and you should absolutely not let them use it. Firstly, you have the For You page, which basically takes all of the things that you're interacting with, and basically it culminates in you being able to access only specific kinds of videos, because it just keeps giving you more and more and more of them. So if your child is interested in, say, I don't know, weight loss, or, into diet planning, they're going to start getting all of these thinspo, like hyper skinny diet orientated videos after, only looking at a couple of them. Their For You page, the primary page where they find videos, is going to just be full of that. Now, when you're absorbing and watching and looking at this much material of these type of topics again and again and again, well, I mean, there's a strong likelihood that your kid will develop an eating disorder, say. Now, that can also feed into things like having dissociative identity disorder, which a lot of people think they have now, or these other mental illnesses where they go, oh, I watched this person with anxiety. Oh, I got another video about a person with anxiety. Now I'm only watching anxiety content. Oh, I have to have anxiety. And so there's a component that comes out of this called Munchausen by internet, where basically young people are absorbing mental illnesses that they don't actually have and saying that they do have them because they saw it on TikTok. The DID thing, the dissociative identity disorder thing, is huge. It is huge because these kids are basically watching people say, oh, I have multiple personalities in my head. I have multiple alters, and it's become this like fun, sexy thing to do where you go, oh, today I'm Jenny, oh, now I'm Timmy, and I'm going to talk to you about how I like to, you know, eat sushi. But oh, this other personality that we have, Susan, she hates sushi, and it's just become this sort of, I don't know, bizarre mental illness factory. That's the best way I can describe it. Get your kids off of TikTok. Do not let them use it.
Let me just send a text to my wife.
It's so bad.
But now the question I have, and this is not a question of defending one's own actions already. You describe it and I say, okay, it sounds like YouTube, the YouTube algorithm, but it sounds like the YouTube algorithm on steroids a shorter time frame to create 10-second, 30-second attention spans and then filter down the addiction process or the targeting process much quicker, exponentially faster.
Yep. That's basically what it is. Yep.
Well, I mean, people should watch. I forget which documentary it was, but I mean, some of the original engineers behind Facebook, Google, and other algorithms, YouTube, etc., have detailed all the ways it was meant for extraordinary psychological manipulation and abuse of. And if you look at young women, especially there's a whole generation of young women that have grown up if you look at what happened to them in their teenage years and right after. You're talking about levels of rates of self-abuse, of various forms of harm, of suicide attempts, a range of mental illness, anxiety, depression levels being reported that is simply off the charts. Some of these are 5, 6, 10 times higher than normal.
Yep.
And it's directly correlated to their use of social media because of these, the Instagrams of the world. And TikTok took all of the worst traits and amplified it times 10. So, it's a very much instead of Trump being worried about kids vaping, he should have worried about kids being on TikTok. But
100%. I mean, I think even Australia, believe it or not, was floating banning TikTok because of the privacy reasons, but also because of what it's doing to people. I mean, there was a bunch of articles that came out describing how young women especially are presenting at doctor's offices with Tourette's or with ticking, basically, that they previously didn't have. And that, I mean, you could argue that that's because they're watching people who have Tourette's on TikTok and it's actually triggered the condition in them or triggered a similar condition in them, or simply that they're basically just absorbing and then, like I said, participating in this like Munchausen's thing where they're also ticking because they watch so much ticking. But either way, it's not good.
Jack Posobiec referred to it as either it's the term or it was his term, functional tick, where people break into dance. I saw literally kids outside, they just start doing like things with their hands. It looked like gang symbols. Joke, are you guys making a TikTok video? But then again, this is not trying to relativize things. You compare it to, the movie $1 Million Baby, where she's training to be a boxer and she's got a functional tick where like she's subconsciously moving her feet in certain ways. So the difference between a functional tick and reflex is just a question of whether or not it's for some form of good or for some form of addiction. And I struggle with this in terms of, parenting my own life, because when we were kids, I used to play Nintendo until we were nauseous. We would be sweating because we spent 10 hours playing Nintendo. I used to get up at 6 o'clock to watch cartoons on television.
Right.
So, am I just turning into the old person saying, when I did it as a kid, it was different because it was on TV. Now it's on an iPad. And I'm trying to reconcile all of these questions in my own head. But TikTok seems bad.
But no, it wasn't different. Well, it was very different when we were younger, because same thing. We used to get up at 7 o'clock to watch Cheese TV, but Cheese TV wasn't making me say that I had multiple mental illnesses. It wasn't convincing me that I had anxiety and depression and DID. It wasn't convincing me that I was transgender. I just was like, wow, that's a dog with a cat body. Like, what a weird cartoon, And same thing with the video games that we had. Everything was sort of Everything was G-rated. It's not like we were watching so much of the crap that these kids have access to. And this is the other thing, is that there's no reasonable parameters and barriers on what these children are accessing, because a lot of parents, they'll give their phone to their child and they'll be like, here, be entertained, Johnny, for 15 minutes. And Johnny, in the meantime, is scrolling through the kids section of of YouTube, and accessing all this weird predatory stuff that comes up without parents knowing, or with YouTube actually doing anything about it. They've tried to crack down. This is obviously the example of YouTube. They've tried to crack down. mildly unsuccessfully. But it's just sad that kids even have access to any of this type of stuff. On TikTok, it's even worse because parents assume that TikTok is safe, but it's not safe. It's just, I mean, the gender stuff on TikTok is out of control.
Yeah, that's
Well,
go for
I'll say,
Robert.
speaking of crap on TV, one of the locals' questions was, did you see the Biden speech?
With all the red?
The red sermon, Robert calls it. The red sermon.
The red sermon, the V for Vendetta backdrop.
To be honest with you, and I don't know if this is just a Sid thing or if you boys can relate to this, but I have so much trouble listening to him because it gives me the worst secondhand embarrassment. So I will happily watch like highlight reels or read about it, but I physically can't listen to him speak because it makes me so anxious because I'm like, oh, don't mess it up. Please don't mess it up.
You should try listening to Trudeau. Listening to Trudeau won't make you anxious. It'll make you nauseous. Listening to him is like, the highlights are out there. It was grotesque.
I couldn't do it.
Sidney, may I read a few?
Of course.
A few chats just to get. Tom QC says Vaush defended child loving quite a few times now. He also thinks it's important to have the right.
We're on Rumble, so he defended pedos and he defended pedophiles. That's what
Robert,
we can say it on Rumble.
It wasn't even in the question. I think the question was phrased nicely. There was
Vaush loves pedos.
Child porn.
I've seen him say things on more than one occasion that I think are indefensible. But hold on, there was a $50.
The guy's not that bright either. People have asked me to debate him, and I was like, I don't engage in dwarf tossing contest anymore.
you don't punch down. Yeah, he's an interesting soul. I actually asked the Quartering the other day. We were chatting about this, and I said, who name me like one female leftist YouTuber or streamer or something who is like comparable to these lads, who's also attractive. And we couldn't think of anybody. We could think of not a single one of these women. There's so many of these weird dudes though that are like walking around defending child porn, and I just go, like, how, and how is this socially acceptable, and how are there never ever any ramifications when they do it?
Sidney, it's the next. And I'm not saying this to be glib or downplay gay rights. Period. I fully support. It's going to be the next letter on the lettering. Because normalizing, what do they call them? Maps, minor attractive. It's the next thing in the plus of.
But that's why the group Gays Against Groomers
got banned.
Tried to suspended their account.
Yep.
Because they don't want. The people that I know that are civil rights oriented in the gay community want nothing at all to do with pedophiles, child abusers, or anything else. They feel they have been caricatured by association with them over time. So but it's what the right said. The right said, if you don't draw a clear limit, they're going to keep going. And generally it's a sign of a decaying culture and society to be celebrating things like trans and be open to things like child abuse. But these are just not popular concepts.
Well, child and child transitioning, which is big these days. Sidney,
which is child abuse. It's just called, they can call it whatever they want.
When are they going to make state laws at that level? But Sidney,
Texas has, and the health and welfare child custody. Unsurprising, I've had a lot of experience dealing with the people in the child custody, government, child welfare space. They're almost all bad. I've met very few that are good. They're statist. They think the state should run families. They couldn't distinguish between abusers and non-abusers. They often targeted the wrong people repeatedly and routinely, let the bad people off often. And they're so enraged at Texas' order that they treat this biological transition treatment as child abuse, that many of them are quitting and others are refusing to enforce it. And they're going to court trying to stop it from being enforced. Mm-hmm. So that's the level of, and we have transitioned into insanity in this space, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But speaking of disturbing things, when I saw the Quartering shave his beard, I was a little unsettled. But but how is the Quartering these days?
He's good. He's plodding along. I know that his coffee company is doing very well. And I know he's thrilled about that, which I'm really happy for him because I know that he was really wanting to get that off the ground. He's good. I honestly wish that he gave himself like a handlebar mustache and then he could have, been a Banff.
Yeah, it'd be more Milwaukee. He could, that'd be Pabst. He's right in the Milwaukee area down, that would be very apropos.
Yeah, I know. He would fit in if he did these sort of things. But I don't know, Jeremy marches to the beat of his own drum. There's no telling him what will and won't look good. But I was like, maybe just like don't do that again. Maybe let's just leave the beard intact, shall we?
Well, it's good. Have you ever been on Friday Night Tights yet?
I have not.
That'd be good. That's a fun show. Have you seen it at all?
Yeah. I mean, they've been lovely enough to invite me on a couple of times. Gary has invited me on a couple of times, but it's just that until recently, I didn't have a microphone that worked, and I didn't know how to do any of this stuff because, believe it or not, I am so technologically demented that I'm like, what am I doing? And I need help. Like Jeremy at the Quartering was the one who abused the crap out of me to even get any of this set up because he was like, let's live stream, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, dude. And he was like, okay, here's what you need to buy. He had to give me like an actual list, and then he had to sit on the phone with me while I put everything together.
Yeah, you got the Shure, the what is it? Shure MB70 something or other?
Yes. Yeah,
SMB.
70.
It looks like the same thing. By the way, someone had asked, you mentioned the word gynocentric before. STFU_FFS, who used the same name here as he did on Rumble as on YouTube, says feminism is decidedly not gynocentric. As a normal red-blooded dude, I'm gynocentric. At best, feminism is gyno-supremacist with a streak of apostate phobia. Gynocentric means focus on the vagina, right? I'm not misunderstanding that.
Yeah, I mean it. Yeah, I think that's probably the official definition. I mean it in the sense that it's like female focus, like female centric, but gynocentric, just it's the way that I've always described Australia. But I mean, it depends on if the individual who said that is referring to feminism as a general rule, in which case, yeah, I mean, I would say that third wave feminism is a female superiority movement. But when I refer to Australia and I say that it's female-centric or gynocentric, I just mean that it's very pro-feminism and focus more on the female experience than the male experience. That's kind of just what I mean. I think there's a differentiation there.
And before Robert gets his last question, I just want to read one more. Mrs. P. Please says, welcome Viva and Sidney, a $50 Rumble grant.
Aww.
Sidney, what are your plans for the near future? What are you tackling? What do you have coming out in the coming days, weeks?
Well, I am currently working on a couple really disturbing videos about some child abuse that's gone on, and some key players that are quite high up in Hollywood and whatnot that have perpetrated it. Because I love covering things that do not get a lot of airtime, and these are often the ones that don't. So I have those in the works and a couple other interesting videos that some of my followers suggested to me. Can you guys hear my dogs barking outside?
I heard someone coming into your room earlier.
They've been smashing on the doors, and I wondered if they're too annoying, I can let them in and they'll
let
stop.
him in. I want to see what kind of dog do you have.
Hold on.
Hold on, we're gonna have a dog off. Hold on. It's a dog off. Get over here. What's it? Oh God. Let's see this. I'm sure there will be no There will be no competition.
Children.
Oh, we got. Oh, that's an Irish setter. 2 Irish setters.
Sorry. Oh my God.
Well, those are beautiful dogs. Don't give the dog. Oh, so we got a cookie. Okay, get out, both of you. Take the dog and get out. Thanks. Okay, go. Don't drop him. So look, Sidney, as far as dogs in the evolutionary scale go, those are dogs. We've got a lap dog.
What breed do you have?
We got a blind Westie and a paralyzed Puggle who has not come in here. But
Puggle? That's a pug cross a beagle, isn't it?
Yeah, pug and a beagle. Great dog, but those are beautiful dogs. Look at the coats on those dogs. There's a hierarchy in dogs, and those dogs are on the upper echelon of the canine hierarchy. If I may ask, just for the names or the subject matter of the Hollywood, is it? I'm thinking of not Corey Haim. Who is it? Corey Feldman? Does it?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm not covering that, but so I'll give you an overview. I'm so sorry. Now we've done it. Now.
I love those are beautiful dogs.
Bun, will you go away, please? Go do something else. Oh my.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's not going to happen.
I think he'll just stay here. Are you good? Okay. So basically, I'll give you a bit of an overview. There's a guy who wrote a show, or he's like the showrunner of a series called Riverdale, and I watched. And Riverdale's a terrible show. I think it was on CW, and it was on Netflix. Maybe it's still on Netflix. And basically the showrunner is one of the creepiest people, but he has so many shows out there that he's worked on and so many things that he's done. And I was like, this person has to be exposed just because of the creepiness of a lot of his interactions, a lot of his dealings. But he's not a well-known figure. You would never know who he is. It's kind of like how nobody knew that Dan Schneider from Nickelodeon was a total creepo until all these young women started coming out and going, yeah, he made me do this, or he got drunk with us, or he would get us drunk on this show. And it just all this creepy stuff. So I like talking about the people that no one knows about, and this Riverdale showrunner is exactly that. Are you
okay?
Oh my god, sorry.
Don't worry. This might be Robert. Do we have any end of interview questions on locals?
Nope. That covers it. So where can people find you, and do you have any? What's been your best white pill experience in this whole thing?
My best white pill in politics?
In or life. Just cultural commentary experience, this whole life experience that you've been through.
The biggest white pill, that is a great question. I would have to think about that. You know what? I'll just give general life advice that's actually been very helpful to me. I used to be I am a control freak. I'm a very type A human being. It has to be how it is. Otherwise, I am very unhappy. And what I've learned over the last little while is that life is going to go how it's going to go. And if I just take my foot off the brake and the accelerator and I roll with the punches, life is actually just a lot more enjoyable. That's, I think, been my biggest white pill, is learning that you don't have to micromanage and control everything life-wise. And if I don't do that, I'm actually a lot happier, because it's going to happen how it's going to happen. All I can control is myself. I guess that's sort of what the Stoics say.
It's the serenity prayer. Lord, give me the power to accept the things I can't change.
Right.
Change the things I can. I screwed it up.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
Yep.
It's a wonderful thing. Easier said than done for some. I was going to ask you your biggest black pill moment, but I don't think we need to end on that. No.
That would be learning about that experiment that happened in Germany, where the children were placed in the homes of known pedophiles. And that happened with the Senate's approval for like 30 years. That was a black pill moment.
Why don't people trust the government, Sidney?
I know. Wow. It's shocking.
It's an amazing thing. Like, Germany has its own. Canada has its own. The United States has its own. It's always the government. And then they apologize for it 30 years later while telling you to shut up and do what they're telling you to do now.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, no, that story, honestly, you both should look into it. It's one of the worst things I've ever read about. And that made me realize that all these imbeciles who were like, no, the government loves kids. It's trying to protect kids with all this gender stuff. I'm like, oh, yeah. Tell me more about that. That's really interesting. So, yeah, big black pill.
All right. Well, we shouldn't have ended on that, but Sidney, this is fantastic. Let's do it again. Let's do it again after your next stories break. I'm looking at the chat. Chat's going too fast for me to even see. Phenomenal. Thank you for coming on, Sidney. Let's do this again for sure.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And you're both wonderful. And, on a happy note, I will say thank you for complimenting my dogs, because they are little turds who are going to now be relegated to outside for being little butts, but they are quite pretty and they're very soft. The
chat was saying let them eat your fancy microphone, but those dogs, I don't know, are Irish setters dumb or smart dogs?
Can two things be true at once?
I was going to say. Fantastic. Okay, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes afterwards. Everyone in the chat, thank you for being here. Snip, clip, share away. And I will put the links to Sidney's content on both YouTube and Rumble. And we'll do this again.